Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Peppermint, an actor, activist, and member of GLAAD's board of directors. And I'm also going to be the host of the 33rd annual GLAAD Media Awards in New York City this year. Thank you! The GLAAD Media Awards honor outstanding images of LGBTQ people and issues across media. They raise the bar for what it means to tell an LGBTQ plus story or include an LGBTQ character. And this year we have almost 250 nominees in 30 English and Spanish language categories. And I am so proud to have a chat today with nominees in our outstanding blog category. We owe a lot to our LGBTQ blogging community because if they're not telling our stories, then no one would be. And they have the power to report on LGBTQ news, profile LGBTQ individuals, and share their own expertise and insights on so many queer topics. I also want to pay homage so humbly to Monica Roberts, the incredible Black trans icon who ran Trans Griot, which won the category 2 times. So let's start by having each panelist introduce themselves and answer the question, how do you define your blog to others? Okay, Alvin, let's start with you.
Okay, my name is Alvin, and my blog is Holy Bullies and Headless Monsters. And specifically, it deals with all of the lies and all of the distortions that have been told about LGBTQ people from the religious right. Uh, I've seen that over the years that when we've tried to basically get our equality and get our rights, we have these organizations, these individuals who call themselves pro-family, and they put out all of this information that's not true. My blog works to refute all of the information that they put out and pretty much make a point that everything that they do, they're always talking about protecting women, protecting children, protecting marriage, protecting women's sports. It's like every time they talk about protecting something, we're the ones who need the bodyguards. And so what my blog does is bring attention to that because let's just face it, the mainstream media is not doing that.
Thank you. Dana, let's go to you.
I'm Dana Rudolph, and my blog is Mombian. It is a lifestyle site for lesbian moms and other LGBTQ parents with a variety of politics, parenting, diversions, and resources for all of the many aspects of our lives. While it tends to get lumped in with parenting blogs, it is not primarily a diary of my own parenting experience. Our family is pretty boring on the scale of things, and I would rather use the blog to elevate other people's stories, share resources, do book reviews of inclusive children's books, things like that. And so that's what I've been doing with my blog for almost 17 years now.
I love it. Mark?
My name is Marcus King, and my blog is My Fabulous Disease. And I've always said that I'm a guy with HIV and a keyboard. And I don't want to minimize what I do because I'm feeling proud of what I do right now. I am a storyteller. I am a long-term survivor who's been living with HIV for more than 37 years. And the story of HIV and AIDS in our community is about resilience and courage and innovation and joy. I won't let AIDS take my joy away another day. And so a lot of times my blog focuses on the people that inspire me and the stories that we have to tell one another, because as horrible as AIDS has been through the last 40 years, it has shown what we are really made of, all of us. AIDS is about everything. It is about racism, homophobia, sexuality, religion, almost everything that you can imagine that's a touchy subject. It's touched on by HIV. And that's what keeps it fascinating for me and why I'm still here.
Thank you, Marcus. Sue Kerr.
Hi, I'm Sue Kerr, and I have a blog called Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondents. I'm based in Pittsburgh, but I describe my blog as a chronicle of the LGBTQ experience in Western Pennsylvania, and more so now throughout the state. I'm the longest running LGBTQ blog in Pennsylvania, and although I'm not a journalist and not a media site, I am one of the, in the sense that I'm not comprehensively covering news. I am one of the few media sites that is dedicated to the LGBTQ perspective. I don't really know how I came up with the name Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondents, but it's been around for 18 years now, and so that it's sort of stuck. But I find it really important that we not only document our stories, but that we find ways to preserve them for future generations so that they can understand this period in time through the eyes of so many different people.
Thank you. Darian?
Yes, thank you, Peppermint. I am Darian Aaron. I'm editor at large of The Reckoning, which is a digital publication powered by the Counter Narrative Project based here in Atlanta, Georgia. The Reckoning provides thought-provoking and original reporting on Atlanta's Black LGBTQ plus community. At CMP, we really believe that great storytelling has the ability to change hearts and minds. And one of the ways that we do the narrative shifting work that we do at CMP is through the content that we produce on The Reckoning. Um, I see myself as a vessel to fill a void in mainstream media as well as in LGBTQ plus media when it comes to Black queer representation. So often our voices are not present in the conversation, and I really believe that The Reckoning is filling that gap in coverage from the LGBTQ perspective.
Thank you.
hmm
Uh, well, first of all, I'd like to say congratulations to each of you on your nomination for a GLAAD Media Award. I think that's wonderful. And I know as a kind of new YouTuber for myself, I have a YouTube channel. Um, I'm beginning to get a sense of connection with the YouTuber community. Certainly, there's people that I follow and watch their channels and look at their content, and likewise, sometimes they'll come onto my channel. And so I'm curious, in the blogging community, is there a sense of camaraderie among you? And if so, how do you support one another's work? And I mean, within this group here of prestigious nominees, or even outside of this group? That question is for anyone.
It's funny because I feel some days if it weren't for GLAAD, none of us would get to talk to each other. That because GLAAD gets to lift us up once a year and put us in a group of nominees, whatever combination that is, we get to support one another and kind of lift each other up. I just did an interview a couple of weeks ago with Darian about The Reckoning because his site inspires me so much. But all of us do. I think more so than with one another, I feel as if writing the story, telling my story, encourages people outside of the realm, outside of blogs, just individuals who feel as if maybe they have a story to tell, whether they're a blogger or not. I do a lot of that kind of coaching. My blog kind of seems to reach out to people individually to say, maybe I should tell my story in some way. And that's great.
I would add that, I think we're all following each other on at least one social media channel, if not more. And I certainly look out for what these folks are publishing that might also have a resonance with my audience. And I'll definitely, repost or retweet and share what they've been doing.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what Dana was saying, it's so funny because I've been connected to Mark and Alvin for years, but we've never really had an opportunity to share space together. And that's one of the upsides of living through this pandemic and being able to connect via Zoom. Like today was the first time I've ever heard Alvin's voice. So I'm just kind of reveling in the magic of Zoom being able to bring us together. But I think over the years, we've all been aware of each other's content, we've shared each other's content, and we've supported each other in our own way. And a lot of times for journalists and for bloggers, one of the biggest ways that you can support is by sharing the content. Because I always say you can write amazing content, but it does not matter if there's not an audience for it, if people aren't reading it, if people aren't sharing it on social media. So I don't take that lightly at all when someone recognizes my work and they share my work. And Mark certainly has done that numerous times over the years, and I've been able to do the same.
I would add that,
Oh, go ahead, Sue.
I'm sorry, one example for me is each year Dana with a family who is that family council. I'm going to get that wrong.
Family equality.
Each year, Dana and the Family Equality Council post like a day, well, it was a day of blogging, and it's grown now in June 1st, I think it is, or is it? And
it's hashtag LGBTQ Families Day that is held every year, usually on June 1st, as a social media event to support and celebrate LGBTQ families.
well, I started in 2005, and that's kind of like the golden era of blogging. And blogs were incredibly interactive. This is before social media really took off. So you couldn't share links on Facebook or Twitter because those things didn't exist or weren't really being used. You had to write a response post and maybe send it out by email or to a group or something. So it was very different back then. There was a lot more interaction literally between the blogs. Social media has given us a chance to do that actually in more ways, but in lots of creative ways. But participating in that day blogging, which throws me back again to what used to happen in the early 2000s, I love it every year. I mean, I don't have children, my wife and I do not have children, but I've participated many, many, many years. And I really appreciate this thing. I get real excited about it and to see what the other bloggers are writing, for just that, it's like a day that I think of Dana every year. And it's very special. And I've seen how much it's grown and what an impact it's had, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Well, actually, I have a question for you, Sue. First of all, how often do you publish new content on your blog?
Well, I strive for 3 to 5 times a week, but it depends a lot on what's going on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So that's
in the rough times, I'm sure there's lots more to say. And question for everyone, especially kind of going off of what Darian mentioned during the pandemic, I would imagine that, and also you, Sue, had mentioned that the golden era of blogging, and certainly there was a lot of people, like everyone was reading a blog, just like now lots of people listen to podcasts more frequently. But I would imagine that during the pandemic, I would guess that there was a shift in traffic and also maybe the frequency at which you created content. Can you speak on that? And then maybe I'll have everyone else jump in with how often they publish and whether they experience that change.
sure. Well, you were talking to me, right? I am.
Yes, please, Sue.
Yeah. Okay. A slight difference for me is because I'm disabled, so I'm home. I've been home since 2010, so I've had a lot of time to write, more so in the past 10 years, and so that didn't change for me. But you're right, I did see changes in the statistics, the viewers who were sharing things. People had more time to participate in some of my blog projects, and I took advantage of that to tell their stories. I have a project called Amplify, which is a series of Q&As with LGBTQ folks with Pennsylvania ties. And we now have almost 350 stories archived. So that's been, very useful. But at the same time, I think as the pandemic wore on, people were restless and it wasn't something that sustained itself, and which is good that we're moving past that. But it affected me too. I had some days when I just couldn't do it, and I was really struggling with all the things that are tied to the pandemic and politics too. So sometimes I just put up a cat picture and that's it.
Piggyback on what you said, when I first began in 2006, I posted 1 time a day, and I wasn't satisfied because I felt that I wasn't getting enough traffic. So I decided to post 3 times a day, and I've done that for a number of years, and I just had to cut back to 2. But basically, Monday through Friday, Sunday through Friday, I post 2 times a day, because basically there's always stuff going on. The things that I focus on mostly is politics and what's going on around the country in terms of school board meetings and incidents that happen, which we have to be on top of, because certain times, certain things happen and you have the religious right. You got the situation now going on with libs of TikTok, where you have this Twitter address just posting all this awful stuff. And you have to look at that stuff and you have to read it and you have to basically refute it. And you have to get the information out there for people to use. That's very important because basically when it comes to stuff like this, you're dealing with people who have a bigger amplifier than you. So basically that's what I have to do. So I try to keep on top of things. I post news briefs, which is me aggregating from other sites. And then I post the main entry, which pretty much talks about the religious right or talks about an incident that's going on and how this incident is basically being distorted and how it's being used to smear LGBTQ people or things like that, or a recent court case or what have you. So it's always, with me, and like Sue said, sometimes it does get too much, but I have to constantly tell myself why I'm doing this, even when sometimes the content's not there, or sometimes when you feel like you're not getting enough amplification, you've got to continue to do what you do because it's important.
Yeah, likewise, I try to post every day during the week, but I think there was a shift when social media really started to take off. There's occasional days where instead of doing another post, particularly if I've written a long one the day before, I'll just spend one day pushing the previous post out on social media and engaging with people on social media. Because as a one-person operation, I'm not only writing my posts, but I'm also creating all of my social media graphics and content and things like that. So I'll find that sometimes these days I have to mix in the pushing out days as well as the days of posting new content. But I hope it strikes a good balance. Yeah.
I just feel like the biggest underachiever next to these folks because I post much less often. I'm not driven by breaking news. That is, and a lot of the sites, as Alvin mentioned, you're aggregating news and you're getting things out there and spinning it in terms of how it is you think it should be important to present this stuff, which I admire so much. I am an essayist. And so I may look at an event, but instead of writing about that event the day of, I'm more thoughtful. I don't mean thoughtful as opposed to y'all. I just mean it takes me a while to digest what has happened, and then I write about it usually from a historical perspective. I've been writing about living with HIV since 1985, and this blog really is just an extension of that. Back in the old days, once upon a time, there were these things called newspapers. And I was a columnist in all of the gay newspapers. I had a little column about living with HIV since the 80s. And now they call me a blogger, and sometimes they call me a journalist. All I know is I like to say what I got to say in about 800 words. That's the common thread there. So I'm an essayist, and sometimes a week will go by, sometimes 2 weeks before I have something, because it's an essay and it's kind of like more of a complete sort of piece as opposed to a breaking news or an aggregated thing.
Yeah, similar to Mark's publishing schedule, The Reckoning only publishes on Tuesday. Every week, you'll get 2 new stories from us. And reason being, we publish long format stories. So these are detailed pieces that are enterprised by us and sourced by us. So it's original reporting. I come from a previous background as a blogger where I was also doing aggregated content and providing commentary to breaking news or to news that was popular at the time and timely. And so what we're doing now in The Reckoning is that we are literally coming up with story ideas in editorial meetings and going out, finding the interview subjects, interviewing these subjects, and creating the piece that goes live every Tuesday. You'll always get 2 new stories every Tuesday on The Reckoning, and that's how we are publishing our content.
One thing I'd like to add is this, for me, it also depends on the time of year. I do a lot of Q&As with political candidates, so this time of year and then in the fall, it just depends on when they return to Q&A. And then Pride is a really busy month. And I make an effort to not always do reporting, but to promote Pride events and activities, especially the things that people don't always know about. And So then sometimes maybe in July I might slow down a little bit just to kind of recover from that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think one of the words that was certainly more of a maybe a buzzword over since 2020 is intersectionality and people just being able to grasp the concept of so many different types of identities, and even this group, as diverse as it is, representing you know, so many different identities in the queer community: Black gay men, people living with HIV, lesbians, people fighting religious persecution, LGBTQ parents. Um, but there are definitely voices that aren't at this particular table, even in the context of this conversation. Uh, and so I'm curious how you might work in some of those other perspectives to um, expose your audience, your different audiences, to, let's say, bisexual voices or trans voices, intersex or non-binary voices, among the many other that exist. And so how would you amplify those types of voices or stories on each of your blogs?
I hand them the mic. You know,
Mm.
I hand them the mic. Others, unlike myself, as often as I can. I know I'm coming from a place of privilege, and privilege has been completely redefined and what it really means deep down for somebody like me in the last few years. I went through life as what I thought was a progressive person. You know, I'm gay. How can I be racist? You know, those sorts of thoughts, right? Until Black Lives Matter really sunk in. And so a lot of my journey as a writer and just as a human being has been, how am I an ally to all of those populations, all of those groups, Peppermint, that you just mentioned? How do I give them the mic? And so I do it by doing a lot of interviews with people unlike myself. And Darian and I had a great conversation on my blog recently where we talked about what it means to have the white gaze. What does it mean to be anti-racist and white? How can I be an ally? Those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree. You know, I think I do try to look for stories that are from people of different identities and elevate those. You know, I do a pretty regular roundup of LGBTQ parenting stories, and I'm always trying to make sure that it's a real mix across LGBTQ identities, racial and ethnic identities, whatever else. Sometimes the stories are hard to find, you know, and I struggle with that because I think these voices do need to be heard. But I do what I can to provide a mix, and then when I'm actually conducting interviews myself, to also, like Mark, do them with a variety of people.
Oh,
Yeah.
um,
Go ahead, Alvin.
oh, thank you. Well, basically, what Dana does is that's pretty much the same thing I do. That's one of the benefits of being able to aggregate stuff. You can look for different information and different stories, and then you put it up there. You put it on your blog, and you pretty much let people read it and decide for themselves. You point it out to them. You know, what I don't have time pretty much for interviews. I mean, I'm lucky if I get a few interviews, and those are generally with head to head with someone from the religious right. So I'm unable to do any of that. But when I talk about certain issues, that's from my perspective. You know, I can't talk about an issue from the perspective of someone who's bisexual, because I'm not bisexual, and that's not right for me to take that voice. So I pretty much look for information, look for stories, and put them out there and point it out to people, saying, you should look at this, you should read this. If you're not bisexual, it will definitely it would definitely help for you to read this, to educate yourself on all members of the community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is something that's always at the forefront of my mind when I am working on content for The Reckoning, because everything that is published on The Reckoning is written through a Black queer lens. But I am a Black cis gay man. So I don't identify as bisexual. I don't identify as trans. So my job is to find those voices, bring those voices to The Reckoning, because I know what it feels like to be a part of an underrepresented, underserved community in media. And that's the last thing that I want to do to my trans and my bi brothers and sisters. So it's my job as editor at large to make sure that those voices are included. And to be quite honest with you, that's something that we can be better at on the reckoning. I think we are doing as much as we can within the capacity that we have, but there's still more work to be done. So I don't think that we have diversified the content as much as I would like for us to. So that's something that we're always working towards. But I think it begins with acknowledging the need for it, which I find is lacking in so many newsrooms, lacking on so many other LGBTQ blogs, to even acknowledge that Black queer voices are missing from the conversation. And again, I think that's why the work that we do on The Reckoning is so important, because the kind of content that we publish, you're not going to find in too many other places online. And that's just a fact.
I mean,
That's
I can.
true. And
Oh, go ahead, Sue.
I one thing that I try to do is have guest blog posts, and I'm real conscious about, like, I don't pay anyone, so it's completely their choice if they would like to share their perspective on something. I've published some pieces for Mark, but I look local, and Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, people post things that kind of have that sort of essay feel, and I'll help them tease it out and create a blog post, and specifically looking for points of view that are different than mine. I just tell you real quick about a situation that just happened. One thing I write about are the pandemic campaign of terror that's targeting the trans community in our nation. And I write memorial posts. And a couple weeks ago, there was a young 19-year-old woman of Filipino American descent who was murdered by her father in Georgia. And she was this right at the intersection of so many identities. She identified as autistic, she was queer, she was trans, she was Filipino German descent. She had mental health disabilities, and there was no coverage of her story. And it was shocking to me. The LGBT media really didn't pick it up. I went around to autistic groups, I went to mental health groups, AAPI groups, and I kept asking them to write about her because it was heinous what happened to her. She was a kid. And it turned out that most of her crimes didn't even know that she had passed. It was because I contacted them. I went through her Facebook post and contacted every single person who had commented who wasn't a family member. Because her family kept saying, they had this narrative that she's at peace now. She's not tortured anymore. It was a mercy killing in their mind. It's horrible. And I contacted so many of her friends, but they're on Discord, they're on Reddit, they're on these channels that you can't really share blog posts on easily. And I felt this weight of trying to carry her story forward, even though it had really nothing to do with my own perspective. And finally, her friends kind of picked that up, and they held a vigil and did some more advocacy work. And it was a real example, I think, of being that bridge and saying, as an adult in the community, I'm going to carry this until I can find the right people, because her story should be in the hands of people who loved and valued her, not just her family. That's not necessarily the people to do that. And I was real conscious of the fact that I couldn't understand her experience, but I could recognize with sympathy, that her story needed to be told. And when her friends held the vigil, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders, because they control the narrative at that point. They did all the media interviews, they did everything. But I'm glad, as horrific as it was, I'm glad that I was able to play that role and find that story and do that. And in fact, this past weekend on MSNBC, Jonathan Capehart did this whole segment on that epidemic, and Catherine's image was on the screen. And I kept thinking, wow, this is great. Like, terrible, but great that she's being shown to the whole world now. Her
What's
face,
her last name?
Catherine Newhouse. Seeing that segment on MSNBC was important. That's what we're all here for, is because we want to amplify to even bigger outlets and tell them what, these are stories that need to be told in mainstream media.
Sounds like that's a real standout section or story or article. Um, I'd like to know a little bit more from each of you what articles of yours or blog posts of yours or entries or essays would you like to see put into a time capsule if you could only choose one?
Oh, one. I'm sorry.
One, darling.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
Alvin.
Oh, God.
And tell me a little bit about it, obviously.
Well, well, to tell the truth, I think that there was one that I really, well, I guess it was the first really big article that really caught a lot of attention. It was right after President Obama had won his first election. On that same night, California had passed Proposition 8, and it caught a lot of surprise because they thought, California is a liberal state. No, what? And that's the essence of my blog. It shows how things like that happen. And everybody was so shocked. I mean, one hand, we're happy we have a Black president. It's the first time it's ever happened. But in another hand, this liberal state that's supposed to, be opening and pro-gay just passed this awful anti-marriage equality law. So I wrote this thing called Message to the Religious Right because you had people like Newt Gingrich basically saying that, oh, this is just, they're these evil gay people. They're just so mad because they didn't win. And look how they're acting. And I was pretty much with the piece Message to the Religious Right, I broke down just why we were upset. It wasn't just marriage. It was like a plethora of things. You had Anita Bryant, you had the AIDS crisis, you had all these times in which we were called these things, and we still are being called these things, and just the suicides and everything. And I was like, this is just, it was my way of saying, you all have basically gone too far this time. You really got us upset, and we're going to basically make you deal with what we're upset about now. And I was surprised about how it caught on, because I guess it caught on because a lot of people felt that way. And that was the first post in which I had, like, we're talking over, I guess it's a minor thing, but me back then still, I had over 10,000 hits in 2 days. And I was like, wow, this caught on. So I would guess that would be the one, because that was the first piece that my blog got attention, and I think it was a general view of just what my blog was about and what these organizations have been trying to do to us all these years.
What's the name of that? Did you name it, or is it just?
Yeah, it's called Message to the Religious Right.
Oh, that's right. Message to the Religious Right. Okay. Anyone else? Everyone else?
You're asking us to choose between our children. Right.
I know, your babies. I know that. I declined to call them your babies because I didn't want to bring you there, but
right. There is a piece that I wrote several years ago about the iconic activist Larry Kramer, who, among many other things, was known for his volcanic anger. And it's called Shopping in the Mall with Larry Kramer. And it's about going to the Broadway in the Beverly Center in Los Angeles to shop to find socks with Larry, and trying to keep Larry calm, because everything was an enormous outrage to him, and watching Larry screaming into the Abercrombie and Fitch because the employee couldn't identify their level of giving to needle exchange, and the entire piece was fictional. At that time, I had never met Larry Kramer, but it was an affectionate piece about history. There's a moment where I'm trying to keep Larry calm, and we're sitting on a bench in the mall, and Larry is saying, you don't remember why we're here and what happened to us. And I say, honey, pumpkin, you remember too much. And it's kind of about the cross-generational between those of us who remember so much, and how does it steal our joy? How does it keep us angry in a way that we're not able to enjoy the here and now? Mr. Kramer read that piece, and it was the first time I'd ever gotten a piece of fan mail from someone that famous, who said, I should probably not admit this, but I enjoyed your piece very much. So although it was fictional, and there's lots of things that I write or not, I think that piece captures the tone and the spirit of My Fabulous Disease.
I'll go next. The piece that comes up for me is one that I wrote a little over a year ago that I titled Invisible No More. Black gay men over 50 are finding the silver lining. And it's a piece about a group here in Atlanta called the Silver Lining Project. And it's comprised of men of color living with HIV over the age 50. And it's a part of another Black gay nonprofit called Thrive SS. And it was really important for me to tell this story because ageism in the gay community is very real. And then if you add HIV into the mix, it's like the equivalent of a social death. And so it was really important for me to amplify the stories of these men because it's really important that Black queer youth know the shoulders on which they stand. Because so often they're not aware of our history and the people who came before us, our ancestors who literally paved the way. So I wrote this story and I was able to amplify these men lived experiences in a way that for the first time for a lot of them, they felt seen. And just talking about that, saying that out loud, I'm verklempt. That's the only word that I can come up with because they were not invisible any longer. And I just want to read a quick quote and I'll shut up. But Nathan Townsend was one of the men that I interviewed for this story. And his quote just summed it all up for me. He said, many times people look at seniors and think that they're at the end or that they're just living from memory to memory. We're still creating. We still have purpose. We still have meaning. We still have value. So that explains it all for me. That was the impetus for me writing that piece, Invisible No More.
So for me, yeah, I agree with Mark. It is a bit like choosing among one's children, and after thousands of posts, it's also hard to remember everything I've written sometimes. But I think I would choose a piece that I wrote right after the Obergefell marriage equality win in 2015, called A Victory for and by Our Children. Because I think the marriage equality fight marked a real sea change from the idea of think of the children being used by opponents of marriage equality to it being used by LGBT advocates and our allies as a reason for marriage equality. And think of the children in LGBTQ families with LGBTQ parents and how they are being harmed. So I think the marriage equality fight represented that shift and a recognition of our families. But one thing I also pointed out in the piece, which I think is very important, is that marriage equality is not the same as parentage equality. And in many ways, we are still, even today, fighting for equal parentage rights in many, many states. And so that's very important. And the piece also pointed out that the idea of now we're all equal varies greatly depending on one's other identities. LGBT families of color deal with much more bias and all kinds of things that white LGBTQ families don't. So I tried to bring that all together in this piece, and I think it stands at the confluence of a number of things for our community. So that's probably the one I'd pick.
Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I realized a couple years ago that archiving my blog would be really important because Pennsylvania's media is like almost non-existent at this point, even our mainstream media. So this summer, I worked with a group of folks and we set up a nonprofit, Pittsburgh LGBTQ Charities. And one of our goals is to do archiving work with my blog primarily, or to start, and then with the smaller blogs that are in Pittsburgh, the other folks who aren't going to have resources to do that. So we want to actually create the time capsule and bring in queer archivists and coders. Like my blog is a mess of HTML coding and all that stuff that's behind the scenes and boring and important. It's important that it doesn't just become on a flash drive in an archive somewhere. It has to be alive. And so I've modified my will to ensure that the blog hosting fees will be paid, the web hosting fees, and the domain registries and all of that sort of thing. But if I were going to pick a post, I think I would pick a story I wrote in 2018, 19 maybe. Worthington is a town in Armstrong County, which is a rural county outside of Pittsburgh. It's a couple counties away. They have absolutely no media in the entire county, nothing. So someone contacted me on Facebook, and they had seen these hideous billboards that were just hateful, nasty, vicious. And I wrote about it, and there was anti-LGBT stuff, but it was much, much worse about, especially targeting issues around Trayvon Martin, and then a whole litany of pieces. I mean, and this man, it brought up so many issues around zoning, because this was outside of the township, but it was in the state, and it was regulated by the state laws, and and it was perfectly legal to do this. It was a distraction. It wasn't safe for driving, and the list goes on and on and on. But it certainly, and perhaps most importantly, set a message that of people who were welcome in Armstrong County and people who were not, people who were safe, who were valued, and people who were not, people whose lives would not be put up on a big giant billboard, and people who were not. And I broke that story. I don't think of myself as a journalist, but I couldn't get anyone else's attention, so I wrote it myself, and it went national. The billboard is still there because there was nothing we could do in Pennsylvania law. And I think that was a story too, for people to realize that you couldn't just go to the mayor and complain, that you had to actually change zoning ordinances, and it was it got really big. So it's not so much that it reflects LGBTQ stuff as actually it represents non-LGBTQ stuff. And that was my responsibility because it was brought to my attention. And it certainly affected people in Pittsburgh, but there was no one else to write about it, because there is no one. As someone said that at the beginning of the session, that we are there when no one else is. So I'm proud that I was able to do that. This is the best part, I think, though, that he had a Sunoco license, I think. They came and took it all away, but he just got another license from a different gas company. So, I mean, that's the kind of interaction that you're dealing with. But we thought it was a big victory when Sunoco took their sign away, that, they didn't want to affiliate themselves with that hate. So I suppose that's the one I'll put in there. I'm a little outside of it.
Now we know what to look for on each of your blogs among the other many, many entries. We're running almost up on time, and I want to respect everyone's time, but I do have a 3-part question for you, so get ready. This is for each of you. For a long time, blogging was referred to as this new sort of media, and so the question is does it still have the same appeal and sort of purpose that it had, or same zing that it had when we first discovered what weblogging was? And do you think, what does blogging look like, or what will blogging be in 5 or 10 years from now, right? And how do queer people find their voices in this landscape that, like you have, in the landscape of internet communications? Anybody jump in? I know that's a big one, so just hit it.
I think blogging stands in a pretty unique space between traditional journalism and current social media. Current social media tends to be much quicker. A tweet or a paragraph post. Regular journalism can be longer, but it can also take more time to get into print, and is bound up with everything that happens in any kind of big media conglomerate. But blogging is nimbler than traditional media while being more in depth than a lot of social media, and so I think it will still continue to have a place.
I think that it's a bit. I think blog, like Dana said, blogging will always have a place. I mean, it may not be the in thing now, but it's always going to be there because people need a voice. You were talking about the median, and I was just thinking, and I was thinking earlier today about how certain networks, they talk about issues, but they don't have us on. You know, like you got these podcasters, Joe Rogan, who will talk all sorts of awful things about trans people, but he won't have anybody trans on. And you have people on Fox News who will talk all sorts of stuff about LGBTQ people, but won't have us on. And it's like we're being deliberately cut out. And so blogging is our way to basically reach people that folks are trying to keep us from reaching. You know, it's a bit more personal, but we do get our voices out there and we do get heard. So I think that's all, as long as there's a place for that, there's always going to be a place for blogs.
I would add that we can look at the history of newspapers and magazines as an example, print, and that they're still here. They're diminishing and struggling, but I don't think they'll go away entirely. And I think the same is true of blogging. What will change is maybe the way that people engage blogging. And so it might be more video oriented. It might be more multimedia site oriented. So there are other reasons people come to see it. And then of course the software is going to change. So that, you know, what I fear is that people will give up on the concept of blogging, and it's really important to you know, at least for those who want to continue. The other piece about it is that it's free. I mean, you can host a site on free software and literally get your voice out to people, and you don't have to pay for the domain and the registry and all that kind of stuff. I mean, and it's important. It's kind of like pamphlets from the early part of the colonizing era of the United States, is that anyone could print one and distribute it. And that's true in Europe too. And I don't actually know beyond that, but so there's always going to be a need for that, like, grassroots expression.
Peppermint, you're 100% right. That is a very big question, and my colleagues have explained it beautifully. I agree with a lot of what has been said so far. The only thing that I have to offer is that whatever's coming next, I know queer people will be at the front of it. We will adapt. We will lead the way. We are content creators. A lot of what's going viral now is being created by queer people, specifically queer people of color, although we don't always get the credit that we deserve for the work that we do. But I mean, we are thought leaders, we are innovators. That's just who we are as queer people. And we'll continue to do that going forward.
I got to tip my hat, first of all, to GLAAD for having this category and recognizing that. I always say this is grassroots journalism, what we're doing. I mean, we are the grassiest of the grassroots because we are folks that just have a keyboard and figured out a program to get the story out of there. I think media changes, it always does. There's the new thing of the day, the new way. I think the through line has always been, ever since I was a columnist, and I bet all of us were writing long before the internet came along, or maybe, okay, a little bit before the internet came along. The through line is that we're storytellers. The through line is that we're trying to get the truth out, or we're trying to explain a truth as we know it to be. And that's certainly the case for me. Whether or not it's somebody sitting in front of a camera on YouTube spilling their heart out about what it means to come out, or that's storytelling, and that's just telling your truth, you know. So it may morph into something else. You know, I hope we all live long enough that we will just be appearing as holograms in people's living room, talking about our experience as LGBTQ people. I hope we live long enough to do that. The point is to tell the story, and I'm grateful to GLAAD for giving us a little bump in our traffic to let people know that we matter.
Well, I am grateful to each of you for taking the time to talk with us again to Alvin, McEwen, Holy Bullies and Headless Monsters. Make sure you read that blog, read Dana Rudolph's Mombian, and Marcus King's My Fabulous Disease. Make sure you read Sue Kerr's Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondents, and I am a PA girl. I might not be a lesbian, but I will be looking for this blog, Sue. And Darian Aaron's The Reckoning. And congratulations again to each of you. First of all, thank you for the work that you have been doing for years in many cases, in most of your cases, and hopefully for the work that you'll continue to do for many years to come. And thank you so much to GLAAD for giving us this opportunity and having, I'll echo what you said, having this category so that we can bring and share these stories within hopefully an entirely new audience. And for those of you who are watching, thank you so much for tuning in and checking us out. You can go to GLAAD.org and of course to GLAAD's Twitter and social channels to find out which one of these very deserving and all of these deserving, but which one of these folks did take home the award, the GLAAD Media Award this year. Of course, in person, the New York Awards will be on May 6th, and I'm so excited to be hosting them. For now, thank you all so much. My name is Peppermint. Take care.